All right, welcome to another episode of New Wine Uncorked, and we are stoked that you're joining us this morning, Friday. And if you're like me, you're looking forward to maybe some time over the weekend to do whatever the case that you weren't able to do over this past week. I don't know. Sometimes maybe we feel like the weekend offers extra hours. I'm not sure, but for those of you joining us, every Friday live on YouTube. So if you have friends that you want to invite, you just tell them, hey, go on over to youtube.com/new wine skins and have them join. And so if you're watching for the first time right now, just go right below the video and there's that subscribe button right there. And if you just click subscribe and then right next to it, that little bell, that's the notification, so that anytime we go live like this or another episode or a talk comes up from New Wine Skins, then you will be notified, and it just keeps you informed. And so we know everyone's heard, knowledge is power. And so the question is how much power do we have, and what then do we do with that power? And so New Wine Uncorked is about stepping into where we're at. Culture, you want to call that culture, you want to call that your tribe, you want to call that your group, you want to call that your society. The fact is that we are placed in a position, specific place for a specific role by this one God who created all things for the purpose of what? And that's what we're trying to decide, right? That's what we're stepping into, faith, this faith-seeking understanding. And so the question is what understanding are we then gaining, and how then does that understanding affect and impact who we are as people and how we live with those people in our midst? And so last week, the weeks before that, we've been entering this dialogue, what does this Jesus, who does this Jesus mean to me? And who is this Jesus? On Instagram, we also have an Instagram for New Wine Skins. Just look it up, just type in New Wine Skins. And I just asked the question, Jesus, so many people call Jesus their rock. He is my rock and my refuge. Well, what does that mean? If he is the rock and we're supposed to step into him, and there's this Christian understanding of being in Christ, what does being in Christ mean for me, Matt Farlow, today in October 2021? And how am I supposed to live that out? Like if I'm in Christ, and then we talk about Christ living through us, well, what does that look like? And then what are some of the hindrances or obstacles that we face? And so I don't know about each of you joining me today, as we can see on the screen, Kayla and Phil. It's awesome because Jim normally joins us on Fridays, and today he gets the opportunity and the privilege of spending time with his grandkids. So yay with that. As you get older, any one of us knows that little kids are just that breath of fresh air. And last week we were talking, and a friend of ours, and she's a young mom, and she was saying, she made this comment on how so often preference keeps us out of paradise, and it's interesting because as we're raising our kids, and we see just the joy of life within toddlers and infants, and they just run and they laugh and they giggle. And Kayla and I were talking, she has a little nephew who's quite young, and I think she was just jumping up and hitting a ball on her head, just bouncing, and he thought that was the greatest thing. Where does that joy go? When I look at Jesus, how come I can't have that same joy? And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So we want to just continue this talk. And so I don't know about the two of you, Phil, Kayla, October is kind of a fun month. I like Halloween, but there's a lot of people around me who, claim Christianity and the like, and they don't seem to like Halloween because they take Halloween and they change it to everything. I don't know if you've seen the latest of this, but there's this new thing called Jesus Ween. So instead of Halloween, it's Jesus Ween, because they, I guess, and other churches, they don't go with Halloween. What do they have? They have harvest festivals and harvest things. And I just don't, I don't know, maybe I'm too worldly, but what is it like are those, when we try to create alternatives by just picking from the world, is that creating an obstacle or hindrance to where people are like, well, why can't Christians just be Christians? If we want to do a dress up and kind of fun thing in October, so do it. But why do we have to then, it seems like we're taking worldly stuff and then we're trying to make it seem cool so we can participate without just Why not just call it Halloween, dress up in costumes, have candy, and celebrate community? So I don't know about the two of you, but like, as we continue to press into this, what are some of the hindrances or obstacles that you've seen in your life, in my life, that we as Christians, we get in the way? And so then when people look at Christianity, they go, I don't get it. Because like, for instance, like I said, Halloween, if we want to party and dress up, why don't we just do that? Why do we have to change the name and make it Harvest Crusade, Harvest Festival, Harvest this? What's so bad about celebrating Halloween, right? We celebrate Christmas on the 25th, and everyone in the Christian world knows that Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, and yet we're okay celebrating that. So I don't know, maybe I'm just making a molehill out of, or a mountain out of a molehill, and it's not that big of a deal, but it's weird how Christians sometimes we want to participate with the world, but in order to do that, we have to take it and then change it a little bit to put this Christian spin on it, as if that's making it righteous. So what's the difference between a Christian Jesus Ween or a harvest celebration and Halloween? I don't know. Maybe you two have a take on this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't have a take on the Halloween Jesus Ween thing. That was a new that phrase, Jesus Ween's, a new one for me. Harvest parties we definitely do, right? But I think one of the things we end up seeing is we do want to, I guess there's a couple of ways we can look at it, but you do want things that we see that we do in the church to be relevant. And what's weird at times is that, we're kind of the last one to the party. And so we snatch on Jesus on top of a common phrase or something like that. And then we use it and we're like, okay, we're relevant when we've been a couple of steps behind. And so that kind of connects to just within the church. Sometimes we find ourselves just with that couple steps behind on what's going on in culture and what's going on in reality. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because there's times when, we do need more information, more thought, more something more information to go into what's going on in culture before we just rapidly respond from our pulpits, because we want to sound put together when we're in the pulpit. But at the same token, it's kind of tough to be a master at everything, and so when we're dealing with these cultural issues, it's a good opportunity to stay connected with ear to the ground to what's going on in the world, and be able to stay relevant in the actual way and not just a Jesus way. Okay, I said that didn't sound right.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a fine line between, living in the world and not of the world. And I think that that's something that we'll probably as Christians struggle with for, to find that balance for our entire lives. What does it mean to be in the world but not of the world? Because when we look at Jesus's life, that probably looks a lot different from the boundaries that the church today sets. He was in the buildings, the homeless shelters. He was amongst them. He didn't have a home to call his own, right? So not only was he in the homeless shelters, he was probably staying there with them because he had to, or because he wanted to, and chose to. He was hanging out with prostitutes on his own volition. And so where do we draw the line? Do we choose Jesus Ween? Do we slap Jesus onto it? Or do we just celebrate Halloween and we acknowledge, like, I'm not worshiping any like devils or demons by dressing up and having fun and community. I think it goes back to like the intention of our heart. Where are we at mentally, physically, spiritually with anything we do, whether it's celebrating Halloween or, choosing to celebrate Christmas on the 25th. We can celebrate birthdays whenever, right? Like, it's kind of silly to only have one day to celebrate a birthday. Why can't we just celebrate the person every day, right? So, what's wrong with celebrating Jesus's birthday on the 25th of December? There's nothing wrong with it, because clearly we do it. So, there's nothing wrong with celebrating Halloween. I think if you are just getting together with community and having fun, you get candy. What's better than that, right? Like, so I think there's just like, you need to be intentional. Like you said, taking time to respond to things from the pulpit is important, so that same thing with whether you are in responding from the pulpit or as a member of the congregation, you have to sit with things for a second and, really be intentional on, where do I stand with this? Why am I choosing to do or not to do, or participate and not participate, celebrate, not celebrate? Understanding your why behind everything is so important, and the intention of your heart, and what, as cheesy as it is, what would Jesus do? Because it brings it all back to Jesus at the center. And I think that is the most important thing of all.
Kayla, what was Halloween like growing up in the Farlow household? Just give me, if you give me 1 or 2 stories of what Halloween is like in the Farlow household.
Well, we always dressed up and celebrated. We went trick-or-treating. I think, like, even from a young age, when I was like probably 4, the group of dads, like my dad went with, a group of their small group, kind of / friend neighbors from church. And we went around the neighborhood. They took us around the neighborhood. And apparently, I don't really remember this, so clearly it wasn't that traumatic. A guy was dressed up and opened the door and scared us. So it started, trick-or-treating from a young age. And then when we lived in Scotland, that was a very interesting experience, because their culture is very much about like the darkness of Halloween. And so for one of my friend's birthdays, we went on a ghost tour for her birthday. And it was so cool because it was super historical. And we got to walk through these castle ruins and the graveyards and learn about the history. So it really wasn't much of like the spirits and the ghosts. It was way more about history. And we dressed up, and they were their, ghouls and demons, and I was a princess fairy mom. So whatever we wanted to dress up as, we did, and we made our own costumes and we had fun. And but we still participated, and we, hung out with our friends, and we went trick-or-treating. We went out and we were in their culture and in their community. But I was still me, as a Jesus freak, goofy little kid who wanted to have her baby doll on her hip as I went door to door. So that's how we did it, Farlow style.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. And I was just thinking, I used to have a neighbor at when I was in college that, man, he loved Halloween. And the thing was just that we can get together in the neighborhood, and how many other opportunities do we have to get together with our neighbors and just kind of wander the neighborhood and get to know people and share our faith a little bit and just kind of be with our neighbors. Like it's an easy excuse to do that once a year at least. So, yeah.
Well, plus too, I mean, we maybe it's a theater liking or background or something like that, but the dressing up too, it gives you an opportunity to tell people, like, so when everyone's dressed up as Darth Vader or a stormtrooper, even here in the States, and you're dressed up as an apostle, like wearing a robe or something, and you have your kids in there, what are you dressed up as? Oh, I'm an apostle. What is that? And so it's like these awesome opportunities. And like Kayla was saying, in Scotland, man, they really dig like the darkness, and like they'll have a blood fest. And like we had some neighbors, and they're still doing it, like where they're into the props, and like it was who could be the grossest, and they would have like they would do these like cuts on their arms and make it look real and realistic, and they really got into it. But it was communal. It really was communal. Like I found it interesting in Scotland too, where we were fairly new to the neighborhood that we were in when Halloween came around, and the kids of the neighborhoods and the parents so made sure to include us. Like they came and they knocked on our door. Hey, are you guys going to do this? And here's what we're doing. And they explained, and it was really a communal event. And sure, like Kayla was saying, it's really the intent of the heart, because for us, and to be honest, as parents, for Kristen and I, as we were raising the kids, there always was the question of like, how much do you participate in what's going on in front of us with the world, you know, and that this idea that Paul brings up, that I became all things for all men. Like, so in this situation, the discernment was, okay, our neighbors, you know, when we were in the States, we knew that they were going to be participating, you know. Now, so Jesus Ween takes the, for those of you that don't know, you can look it up. And it's something that was new to me this year too, believe it or not. I actually heard it. I'm not a big fan of Christian radio stations for this reason. It's a weird thing. I feel like I listen to the music and I'm like, those Christians, what are they talking about? They make it seem you're either in our world or the evil world, right? But so the Jesus Ween is like, it's this push, I guess, where you don't dress up as costumes, you wear white. And then I believe, and someone could correct me if I'm wrong, so you come on the YouTube and put the comments on there, but instead of giving out, you could give out candy, but the idea is to give out tracts. You know, if anyone remembers Bible tracts, you know, the 4 spiritual laws and such, so that people know that Jesus is more. So it's to wean off the world and to wean into Jesus. And I'm like, okay, I mean, the intention and the idea behind it, how can I'd be against that, right? I want people to get more out of this world and more into the world that Jesus came to establish, the kingdom of God. But does that mean that we always have to? I feel like it always seems like a criticism. So for the people that are anti-Halloweens and they call it Harvest Festival or whatever the case might be, I don't know why. Like, why not just call it Halloween? What's so evil about Halloween? If they look at All Hallows Eve, you know, and All Saints Day, like at least get some history. Like the church has been actually involved in this aspect of celebrating the saints in the night before. And there was a real, like one of the popes, they got involved, and it was a ceremony to, you know, pray against the demons and the ghosts and things like this. So there was something spiritual about it. And so nowadays I feel like sometimes we jump into the Christian is more anti this world as opposed to embracing it. And I think that's where, if people historically look at some Christian, you know, figures who actually were all about this world and yet all about Jesus first, guys, I'm thinking of like Bonhoeffer and the like, you know, where he even says we need to be sometimes more worldly than the world. Well, what does that mean? Doesn't that mean that we embrace creation as it is, that God has created us with imagination? I mean, how many people who push against Halloween with their churches still go to the movies and watch the Avengers and the Marvel movies? I'm sorry, but how is that not participating in something that's just because all the comic book characters what's their point? They take on the role of an Avenger, you know, and they are the law unto themselves. Well, any Christian should be like, ooh, got to push against that. You know, I mean, I don't want my kid dressing up and thinking that he can be Iron Man, you know, or is it dangerous for my daughter to believe that Wonder Woman is the pinnacle of what a woman should be, you know, because then what does she want? Well, isn't that pushing into violence and things like that? And then people go, whoa, step back, Matt, you're taking things too serious. I'm like, isn't that the point? Is that we take things too serious when we, you know, have whatever, we want to change things. So we're like, oh my gosh, don't you understand how serious this is? If I let you dress up like believe you're a ghost, then your soul's going to be lost forever. And I don't want to make light of it, but I also want to allow it to be what it is. It's a night where, I mean, I'm sorry, but in our area right here, we have some little families of little children. And there's just nothing more delightful to me when I am able to step outside and I hear, you know, at dusk and all the little kids and they're scuttling around and they're kind of nervous. You know, you can see them out by the sidewalk and the parents like, no, it's okay. And they scuttle up to your door and, oh, trick or treat, you know, and they're just so excited. And I love seeing just their joy. What's wrong with that? You know, to celebrate that instead of always trying to be different per se, you know, like Harvest Fest. I'm not sure. And maybe I guess I've never really asked some of these churches, why change the name, you know, trunk or treat? What's different from that than Halloween, right? You know, and it's all about dressing up, which I think is great. I just wonder sometimes if the Christian in our push to be righteous, we become too anti this world.
Yeah, I think that major point that you brought up at the end there is kind of the major thing with all this is how can we live within this world and not be anti this world, and find excuses to join with our neighbors, find excuses to link up with our community. I remember at a church I was involved in before, we did harvest parties every year, and there were people that so many people that never walked into our church on Sunday wandered in with their kids for the harvest party and got a bunch of candy. And most of the kids that went to church, we didn't have our kids wearing costumes, but we went and got a lot of candy and hung out with leaders from our church that would be doing these ridiculous games and stuff like that with our kids. It was great fun. But then the families that lived around the church, yeah, it would be just like Halloween. They'll bring their costumes and they'll just have a good time, and they're having the good time with the church community. And that was kind of an inroad for that family to get familiar with our church a little bit. And it, for some of it worked out because some of those families did end up coming to church, and like they were involved with our, we had day camps during summer and stuff like that. So there was some connection with our community. And you could just imagine like a church that doesn't have any connection with their community, this is a good opportunity for that, because the idea is not to be anti the world, but to be engaged with your community and find an excuse for your community to wander in the buildings of your church, so in the walls of your church. So yeah, so I get what you're saying. Get what you're saying with all that. My family doesn't like the ghosts and goblins and stuff, but yeah, we do celebrate Halloween every. Man, let's see. We've lived back in this neighborhood 4 or 5 years now, and I think I only went trick or treating once with my youngest. And yeah, we only did it once. We don't have many neighbors that we know too well with kids kind of our age that could go trick or treating too. So we didn't do too
Yeah.
much of it. But yeah, prior years, yeah, we did a lot. We did a lot when Micah was really young. We did a lot of trick or treating. So definitely.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
at some of the churches that we've been at, when they do harvest festivals, maybe I'm just remembering wrong because I'm remembering from Scotland, but they do like it around Thanksgiving, not Halloween, which makes more sense to me to do a harvest thing around Thanksgiving, not Halloween. And I mean, some churches here did it, but mostly in Scotland where you're celebrating being thankful, and so you bring your goods, you bring your harvest, and you present it to the Lord, and you give it to the church, and you donate, and then the church goes and they give it to those who need it. And I think that is a really good concept. If you're going to do a harvest, like bring your harvest, right? And then allow it to be distributed to those who need it more. So that's something, if your church doesn't do it, or if you don't do it, we can start doing that around Thanksgiving, and as a way to be more thankful of what Jesus has provided for us, and to participate in our communities, right? Like get into our neighborhoods and figure out who lives around us and what ages are they and what do they like. I think that was one of my favorite things about Scotland, was even though I didn't necessarily care about all their dark bloody gore, I could appreciate the art that it took to be able to create a cut that was actually realistic. Like the art behind that and the time and effort that goes into that is amazing. I don't know if you've ever watched like makeup tutorials, but it's basically the same thing. It is art to design a costume. And the acknowledgement of the spiritual world was very prevalent. And so, yeah, maybe they didn't acknowledge angels first, but there's something to be said about their whole, like there was definitely a holy fear there. There are these spirits and we need to be wary of them because this is a real thing and the spiritual world is real. And I was like, yeah, that's a very real concept, and Americans don't have that same like awareness. They're not aware of that, they don't care as much. And I'm like, yeah, but also let me tell you about angels and how cool these spirits are, you know? So you got to be able to celebrate both aspects and acknowledge both aspects, because especially as Christians, we are dealing with the good and the evil. And we live in this paradox of both, where we are created very good, but we acknowledge that there is spiritual warfare and there is evil all around us all day. So there are demons in our lives.
Yeah, and I think in to your point, Kayla, like separating ourselves so much from the world, and this is, I think, the maybe this is the tension, is the Bible doesn't call us to separate ourselves from the world. It's the Spirit working within us that sanctifies us, and that is the so-called separation. But it's not a separation in the sense that we are completely isolated from that which we are placed in. You know, the separation is, again, going back to what you were saying earlier, Kayla, the intent of the heart, right? I'm not sure why we have to have Christian celebrations and Christian music and Christian movies. Isn't God the creator of all? And so even if someone takes, and this is, maybe I was teaching one time, not maybe, I was teaching one time at a school, and I just said, look, we were talking about things of this world, and so they're not bad. God did not create, for instance, our sexuality as evil. It's the human, when we step into it and try to then project it into our image and our likeness, whether it's our sexuality, whether it's our materialism, whether it's our finances, whether it's our religion. It's when the human gets involved. And then what we do is we try to make Jesus more so in our image as opposed to who he is. And it's not just about Halloween. I go into, you know, how do we interact with and engage aspects of the Texas abortion law? You know, how do we engage truths and reality of 2 summers ago when with the Black Lives Movement, Matters movement, and the willingness to protest? It's not that we're saying that any kind of policing or law and order is evil. It's what we're saying is the people who are in these positions, you know, and so same thing with Halloween. It's not that the celebration's evil, but if I start to celebrate the demons and start to pray and have you dress up and want to actually sacrifice, you know, virgins, someone might say, ooh, because sacrifice was still a real thing in the Old Testament, right? Sacrificing the goats and these animals. And so I think if we step back and are willing to go, okay, wait, this is a real thing. You know, the reality is that the world has movies, the world has sex, the world has money. The question is are those things in and of themselves evil, or is it the people who are involved that what they do then brings in that evil? And again, it goes back to kind of our conversation before is, well, where is the darkness? Where is this me? Am I the darkness? Or is it something that I grabbed onto because for whatever reason, I feel more inclined to appreciate the sinfulness of life as opposed to the righteousness, you know, and always understanding that there is a spiritual battle going on, you know. And that was some of the greatest conversations with some of the parents in Scotland, and even in this last church that we were in the Midwest, talking about it and saying, oh, well, we dress up. Absolutely. Yes, we're going to go and trick or treat. Okay. And even that whole concept of trick or treat, you know, in Scotland, it was like the kids came to the door and we trick or treat. And then we got to choose, okay, give us trick, give it a treat. And they had to then like, yeah, they're tell a joke, you know, or come up with some in order to get the treat. Right. And it was cool. It was super interactive. Well, I kept thinking when we were talking to some of our friends from the church, and they were surprised at how involved we want to be, because like when the kids come to the door and when I was dressed up, whoa, they light up and they're like, whoa. And then when they find out too that you're a Christian and you want to do this, like engage, there is even more questioning, you know? And so that's where I feel like sometimes we take ourselves out of the conversation, you know? And so how though is it that, let's say, for instance, Phil, like you're not about the dressing up, but can you still participate? Are there levels of participation do you think we can have with these, you know, whatever worldly things, you know, and how do we go about discerning that?
Yeah, my family, or at least my kids in particular, are cosplay. That's their thing. So yes, we got wigs, and Micah has a box full of all sorts of costume stuff, and yeah, makeup, theater, all the stuff. So we do that, just not necessarily so much. Not, but on Halloween, yeah, they did do cosplay kind of stuff. So it was all good. And I'm thinking, Kayla, you mentioned earlier how in Scotland, they'll do the harvest parties during Thanksgiving. And I'm just wondering, yeah, why wouldn't we do like these kind of parties from Halloween all the way till Advent? And then just switch up the parties in Advent and just have more parties in Advent. So and it's just more community engagement, more celebration, and then we just introduce more people to our world, more people to what does it mean to be a Christian, and this is what we celebrate. I mean, we know that anything we have comes from the Lord. We're just kind of extending that recognition of Sabbath and sharing that with other people, and then just extend that into Advent and just keep it rolling with more parties, more celebration, more engagement of the community into the world of what Christianity is about. So, yeah, my thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the theologian Karl Barth said that the one thing that's missing so often in the church today is laughter. It's like as Christians, we become too serious when we say yes to Jesus or we acknowledge what he's done. And then it's like you have to become so serious that you're against the world. I feel like Jesus was for the world, and we forget the fully humanness of Christ. I think just like for me, even though I'm not like a full on like, hugger and, especially with COVID and all this stuff, there is something refreshing when you're able to embrace the person in front of you, right? And you're face to face and you're in each other's space. And irregardless of what that person thinks on Halloween or if it's devilish, the fact is that the two of us though are in that space and we can be for each other the presence of the Lord, and that doesn't mean that we have to be so negative. I'm not saying that we accept everything of the world. In fact, I think this is where the Christian, I think if we actually participated at a level that Christ did, as Kayla was talking earlier, the world would then allow for us to even speak into it, because that participation, and this is what New Wine talks about all the time, is creating space for the dialogue. The Christian in today's culture, I feel like so often goes in yelling with the megaphone and expects the sound to create the space and the noisiness and the loudness of it. Whereas Jesus was the complete opposite. He would come into town sometimes and people didn't even know. Who were the ones that knew that Jesus was there? Like, that's what's fascinating to me. Go and read some of the gospel accounts when Christ comes in. Who is it that always knows that Jesus is there, right? The leaders do, but they know for reasons not to go see him and embrace him, right? It's the people who are broken in need, and they embrace him. Why? Because he comes in, and this is again, the I am that I feel like we miss from the gospel. We tend to say 7 I ams, but the one I am comes from Matthew 11 at the end, where he says, take my yoke upon you, my burden is light, for I am gentle and humble of heart. Gentleness and humility are two characteristics I feel as though I'm speaking to myself when I say the church in the modern era has lost. Gentleness and humility. The truth is that divine love says, I'm willing to be crucified. I'm willing to be raped. I'm willing to be tortured. I'm willing to be beat for your sake. I don't know, like, if I'm willing to embrace that kind of love that pours out from the cross to the extent that Jesus embraced me, and that's what I wrestle against. Is I wish it were just as easy as dressing up and going and hanging out with these people who don't know Jesus, right? But there's got to be something deeper there for me. And then if there's something deeper, then that's when we question, wait a minute, is it okay to go to the porn convention in Las Vegas as an evangelical, and so 3 couples are going to go and we're going to have, what if we start a church right there, XXX? And people are like, oh, that's why. Well, porn stars need Jesus just as much as the poor, right? And I remember when the 6 couples that started Triple X Church, it was a big deal, and that really is a real thing. And why? Because there are people in this area that they were in that needed Jesus. And is there anything out of the limits for us to be evangelizing, or have we lost in today's culture? A lot of people talk about the evangelical church, but maybe the evangelical church has lost the understanding of what evangelical means, the euangelion, right? The good news and the proclamation of that. So how is it though, like if I disagree with Halloween, can I still proclaim the good news when people are coming out? And that's where I think the people from Jesus Ween would say is that's what they're doing. Could that be too much though? Is that too much of a hey, us and them, us, white, dress, which is, again, goes into that whole idea of purity. They dress themselves in this whiteness, the all white, the shirts, the clothing, it's symbolize purity. But doesn't that then and maybe there is got to be a distinction of an us and them sometime, but it seems like the Bible claims that distinction is not really something that I create. It's the Spirit who judges. But then when heaven happens or Christ comes back sitting on the judgment seat, it's not me who separates the sheep and the goats, right? It's not me who establishes the us and them. But so often in today's culture, like in the Jesus Ween and wearing the all white, isn't that almost an aggressive, non-loving way of saying, you're wrong and we're right, because look at how we look. We're all dressed in white and pure, and you're in costumes and evil. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading into it too much. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm being too judgmental of the Christians.
We are called to judge one another in love and hold each other accountable. But no, I think that, yeah, it is a weird, I don't know. It's a weird concept. I don't know if I can get totally behind Jesus Ween. But I just like dressing up. But I'll dress up. I have a dress up bin as a 22-year-old adult. I still have a dress up bin located in my apartment. And I will unashamedly like pull it out and dress up just for kicks, like just to have fun, because you're right, we need to laugh more. And it is scientifically proven that the more we laugh, we actually extend our lifeline. So I don't know what other reason, like, I mean, I know we're here for eternity, hopefully, but like.
Well, I mean, even, and I don't want to like make light of this, but the creativity and imagination of the human, like, why can't we, I mean, behind you, look, that's a beautiful, we all have paintings behind us, right? Some sort of picture, that's art. Yeah. Well, why can't we be artistic when it comes to Halloween and creating so fine? If you want to participate in Jesus Ween, instead of dressing in all white, why not become a biblical character, or something like that, where why not? And I think this is where some, if you go back to the 14th and 15th century with the Corpus Christi plays, the Christological plays, the church actually would go into the center of towns and put on performances to display what happened, to get within our mind's eye this image of the truth of the cross. I mean, it's one thing to have a symbol or an icon hanging on the wall. It's a complete another thing. And this is what got, the Passion of the Christ. Some people thought it was too brutal. The crucifixion scene, they thought it was too bloody. And I'm like,
have you read the Bible?
Have you? I mean, just go back. I'm sorry, but like, think about fighting in the medieval times with swords. If you've ever cut yourself with a cutting knife, it's pretty gnarly sometimes. Can you imagine fighting where people are like slicing limbs and stuff? And so you're running around, you have, this dude running around with like partial arm because he got sliced off here. And then this woman over here is running with her left arm like torn. I'm like, I'm sorry, but we don't even have to go to 1st, 2nd century, go into the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s. I'm pretty sure life was pretty brutal back then. And it's not to highlight the brutality of the human. None of us need to do that. But there is something to be said about like embracing our creativity and imagination. And I feel like as Christians, again, to push back, to make sure that people know that we are different. We tend to be, obstinate or aggressively obnoxious against anything that's supposedly worldly. And so but then we do the same thing. Anyone who's anti movies or the theater or rated R, but then still go to Christian movies. I mean, or a movie made by a Christian, something like that. Like it's like we get caught up in our own definitions as to what is Christian, what's not, and yet like what can't be Christian if this God is the creator of all things, right? The creator of all. And so how then do we want to remove ourselves, or why do we want to remove ourselves from this? Isn't it the point of maybe Halloween is another opportunity where the Lord's providing us for people to see, actually, you're almost there. If we continue to press in, you start to see, why do we have these inklings or this fascination of the darkness, of ghosts and goblins, or of dressing up? Well, because here, let me tell you a little bit about us as a human. Like, we've strayed from our original intent, or we've strayed from this relationship. And so here's why. In the source that I'm coming from is this historical book, but a real living book, and they can see then where they're like, oh, that makes sense to me. Why, like on Saturday, the last couple of months, you've gone and you just picked up these houses or this schoolyard, and you don't even have kids at the elementary, but the last 3 Saturdays, you and this group of people have been there cleaning them up. And I don't understand why, but now that's starting to make sense to me, because you're starting to, the more I hang out with you, the more I start to realize about who you are and this faith in this dude named Jesus. And it makes sense, but that's the lived experience when we live within the realm of where we're at, as opposed to always trying to be counter culture.
And I think one of the themes we've talked about today was just the idea of being counterculture versus being anti-culture. And I think part of being anti-culture is trying to kind of hide ourselves or shield ourselves from some of these scary moments, some of the darkness we see in the text, some of the violence we see in the text, some of the irony at times we see in the text. And we find that as taking the text seriously, or taking the scriptures seriously, or taking our faith seriously, when all actuality, the Bible is so deep, where we see violence and scary moments in it, but there's also irony and funny things and different things to laugh at. I'm just thinking of the last time I preached at a church was back in August. Well, it was a while ago. And I preached on Paul coming into Ephesus, and in the middle of that story, in was it Acts chapter 19, in the middle of the story, you have the 7 sons of Sceva. You remember the 7 sons of Sceva, where they were trying to call out a demon from someone, and the demon jumped out and beat them up? Like, yeah. How can you read that and not laugh every single time? I know it's a serious story, but every single time I read it, I chuckle. But there's so many stories like that where, there's things that we should be able to laugh at, and we should be able to find the depth of our faith. There's so much that's engaging in so much of our lives, and we should be able to share that. So finding excuses to share that, finding reasons to share that with our community, and allowing people to see that our faith isn't just don't do this, don't do that. No, but we're invited into a life with a Savior who loves us and who doesn't need to hear that someone loves them. So definitely.
Yeah, I think another like highlight of today's conversation is the importance of community, because even within all of these events, whether it's a harvest festival or a trunk or treat or Halloween or even Jesus Ween, it's centered around community. We got to be in relationship with each other as the church. And so to be in relationship with the community and the world around us, and participate in culture, both inside and outside of church. And I think that is one of the key points. I mean, even in my everyday life, one of my jobs is a foster youth tutor. And the first 3 sessions have nothing to do with school. It is rapport building. It is creating that relationship, because in order to even move forward with anything else, that relationship, that trust, that has to be established. And that's the same with anything else in life. We have to, and we so often skip over that, but we have to sit with someone where they're at, regardless, right? Whether it's on Halloween or not. We have to sit with them, and we have to build that relationship so that we can trust each other, so that we can have voices in each other's lives so that we can share our thoughts and opinions and share our perspectives. And that is one of the things, you know, that allows us to grow the most, when we get to sit and talk with someone else and listen to their perspective and their different opinions and beliefs on something. Then we are able to share ours and share like why we believe whatever we believe. Why is Jesus so important in every decision that we make? Why is that crucial to us? We get to sit there and say and explain that to them. But if we don't first sit with them and take that opportunity, then that conversation will never get to happen.
And it's the confidence too, right? Knowing what you believe and who you are. Then when I'm sitting in the midst of sinners, I'm not concerned about their stain wiping off on me, right? And too often we have an us and them mentality, so that then like the Christian church and Christians, whatever people group they are, right? Whether it's the LGBTQ community, whether it's addicts, whether it's homeless, whatever people group we say, right? Whether it's people who are pro-life or people who are pro-choice, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, there's a people group that we have to have that we can demonize so as to point to and say, hey, look, we're better than this. You know, I feel like sometimes what the Christian church has done is made 2021 or 2020 and all these years is nothing more than a Jerry Springer show. We want to bring the people up who are sinners, highlight them, show what the evil and the darkness and the dirtiness of what it means to be a non-Christian, and say, hey, look, if you truly want the best life now, hey, look, you want the riches and all this stuff, then just be a Christian because we're better, you know? And it's not even about righteousness or love. It's about being better than the person next to you, you know? And that to me is seemingly completely the antithesis of what Jesus came. I feel like sometimes Jesus would have been like maybe one of the bigger costume makers and been like, dude, look at this, oh my gosh. And he would have pulled in, you know, he'd been like, well, you know, I'm sorry, yeah, I'm gonna pull on my Son of God, you know, brain and jump into the imagination and things like that. And come on, I don't know, right? Maybe this is, you know, the first century Halloweens is when we finally understood. Maybe that's where dinosaurs were and stuff like that. When we talk about this, and like this is where all these crazy, I don't know, but I feel like we so discount sometimes when we're so quick to judge negatively, you know, as opposed to stepping back and having this dialogue and saying, yeah, I don't quite understand it. Like, so tell me the fascination with the dark side, you know, tell me that, just asking questions.
Yeah, and that would help us embrace our creativity. That would help us embrace just the community. Yeah, definitely. Where are you coming? Why are you interested in these things? Asking those kind of questions. And yeah, not asking those kind of questions doesn't make it so those things don't exist in the world. But we have the answer through Jesus and through, and Kayla brought up earlier, we're dealing with the spirit of light against the spirit of darkness. We're dealing with the Holy Spirit against everything else going on in the world. So definitely we have an answer. We have a response to those things. So yeah, let's go into those conversations. It may point out whether or not we are aware of those conversations and how depth our relationship with Jesus Christ is. I was kind of holding that back the entire conversation, but I'm just gonna throw that out there just for a second.
Which I think is great. And this is what we're gonna do next week. And I loved your point that you made, Phil. And I actually misspoke in saying, you know, we don't, why are we so counterculture? But you were right. It's counterculture is different than anti-culture. And I was speaking more anti-culture. And so your correction is absolutely the case in point, is that the Christian is meant to be counterculture, not anti. And this is who Jesus was, right? That there is this different way. It's in the Christian standpoint, it is better because it is meant to be the way. So in a sense, it's not a good or bad. It is, when something is, it is, you know, Shakespeare says there's nothing good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. Well, the logic behind the way of Christ is that he is the logic of God. He is the Logos. And so this is the conversation we want to continue that Phil was talking about. The difference between anti culture and counterculture. And next week, we want to talk about that. What is that pathway in front of us? We have the ability to go the Jesus way, which is a counterculture, but it's not an anti-culture. It's actually more of an embracing of the culture, of the people in front of us. What does that look like, though? What does it mean to be all things to all people in front of us? And so, as always, we're so stoked that you joined us this Friday to discuss the truth of uncorking our faith, faith-seeking understanding, going to the promised land of Christ or the preferences of our people in front of us. You know, we have a choice in front of us. And so this is what we're going to continue on. Next Friday, join us 10 a.m. We're going to talk about this anti-culture, counterculture. What does it look like to be with culture and in culture? So on behalf of Phil and Kayla, I'm Matt. This has been another episode of New Wine Uncorked. And so until next Friday, we'll see you on the flip side. Have a good one.